last winter, when I was living in Istanbul for a few months, I walked through the streets of Istiklal, which is at the heart of this bustling city, and I would see these musicians from Syria who would play music every day, and there would be dancers, these refugees dancing, and these were young, bright people who were trying to keep some part of their home away from home. And I would walk by this cab stand that was on my way home as well, and there was a group of refugee women living on the street there. And I would notice these cabbies bringing them food. And at one day, I heard one of the cabbies talking to a woman refugee and saying, "I haven't seen you and the kids for a few days. Where have you been?" There are 2.5 million refugees in Turkey, and I noticed that these cabbies were actually trying to look out for these women vulnerable on the streets in the cold days of Istanbul. Um, and the system is not enough, that it's making it necessary for these random acts of violence. So the system is not enough, that we need a systematic and institutional response to the crisis we're facing right now. Of course, isolating the refugee issue as a humanitarian problem fails to get to the heart of the problem, which needs a political solution. Of course, in the ideal, we would have democratic, responsive governments in places like South Sudan, Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen, and many more, to ensure that refugees can go back home. But this is not in our hands as UNA members. What we can ask for right now is a better response to humanitarian crisis and refugee crisis that we're facing, and that's what we want to do from our Congress today. It is a humanitarian crisis, and not just in Europe and Syria, but it is all over the world. So in October, I gave a talk at a UNA Members Day event at the SUNY Global Center also to my SUNY Global Engagement Program students. And the title of that talk was "Too Little Too Late, the West Discovers the Refugee Crisis." And my goal there was to point out this alarming trend that has been going on for a while. The fact that UNHCR has been pointing to this trend for a while should be a lesson to us. The number of refugees and asylum seekers and internally displaced people has been going up, and in 2014, we had the highest number of refugee increase in a single year. 14 million people were displaced from their homes as a result of conflict or fear of persecution, and 80% of refugees are hosted by the developing world. So Turkey, Pakistan, Iran, Ethiopia, and Lebanon are hosting the highest number of refugees from Syria, Afghanistan, and Somalia. So the pressure on UNHCR is tremendous. With limited resources, the organization is trying to fulfill its mandate to take care of 60 million refugees and internally displaced people, providing them with basic needs, whether they're in the urban areas, which most refugees are, and whether they're in camps, to make sure that they have water, they have shelter, they have health care, and they have education. It is essential to recognize for all of us that refugees do not have the same rights as citizens. They cannot necessarily work unless the host government allows them, right? So they live dependent on UN and UNHCR. They live dependent on humanitarian agencies. They live dependent on the host countries. We have here Fabienne Dubuet, the representative of United Nations from Medicine Sans Frontiers and Doctors Without Borders International Office, who is going to give us a view from the field about this crisis we're facing right now. Now, UNHCR is also working to provide legal advice and help governments to fulfill their obligations under the 1951 Convention on Refugees. And the goal is that no asylum seeker is turned away without a determination of their status. And it is becoming very obvious to us that the ideal solution of voluntary repatriation back to one's own country is not in the foreseeable future for many asylum seekers and refugees. And there are too many refugees in too few countries. Now, local integration of millions of refugees in one of these countries could create troubles for these countries with fragile economies and also political sensitivities. So there is a dire need for an increase in the number of resettlements to countries that can afford to take in refugees. And these tend to be Western Europe and North America, and the United States being one of the largest refugee intake countries. We need to increase those numbers. Kevin Schumacher, the Middle East and North Africa program coordinator of Outright Action International, will point out that the space for refugee resettlement is especially very important for those people who face danger and need legal and physical protection, and survivors of torture and violence, and people who lack any foreseeable alternative solutions. Now, the preservation of asylum space in the context of migration and high number of asylum seekers has been a challenge. And in addition, there have been more restrictions put in place due to fears of terrorism, which has been in place since 9/11, actually, through legislation and regulations that make it very difficult for asylum seekers. Our goal here is to create a refugee system with fair treatment of refugees, and access to basic needs and services and protection of lives regardless of their status. Because these abstract numbers, we throw out there 60 million, whatever, they can't capture the real suffering and anxiety of refugee families and refugees go through. So we have here Sana Mustafa, who has generously agreed to come on stage. She's a refugee and a student from Bard College, and she's going to share with us her experience and her family's experience seeking refuge away from Syria. While Sana has made it to the stage here, remember there are 60 million stories out there. Our goal here is to take action, to ask our Congress to respond to this crisis more effectively. So let's hear from our panelists about the crisis now and then take action. So without further delay, I'll turn it over to Fabienne to give us the view from the field. Fabienne?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to first thank the United Nations Association of the United States for inviting MSF today. It's a great pleasure to be with you this morning. I'm not going to lie to you. Those are very difficult times. Difficult times for MSF, but above all, difficult time for a number of people. We are trying to continue to provide assistance and hopefully some protection in a number of crises. And what I'd like to do with you in, I have 8 minutes, I think, is really try to really basically highlight a bit of a constraint that we have right now, which is that on the one hand, as explained, we have definitely an increasing number of people looking for safety and security. And they are, most of them, the big majority of them, fleeing conflicts. They are fleeing a number of mass atrocities. And I will go back to that because we are right now confronted to a conduct of hostilities, especially I think in Syria and Yemen, which are simply not acceptable and which are impacting the refugee flow and are also impacting very negatively the kind of humanitarian action that we can provide on the ground or not. And this is actually a very serious constraint for us these days in Syria and in Yemen. And so we have, on the one hand, more people fleeing and looking for safety and security, and on the other hand, we have this humanitarian space which is really under attack and very seriously challenged, as I just said. I'll really focus on the Syrian crisis. I think we all agree that this is the biggest, the world's largest crisis right now. I think half of the refugees arriving in Europe are actually from Syria. The figures have been reminded. We have 4.6 million Syrian refugees abroad, and we have actually also inside Syria more than 6 million IDPs. Since the beginning of MSF, in fact, our history has been very connected to refugees and mass exodus. You know, the first large intervention of MSF dates back from the 70s. When our organization was actually involved in providing assistance to Cambodians who were escaping the Khmer Rouge. And as we grew and as MSF developed, we got more and more involved in refugee crisis in Rwanda, in Afghanistan, in DRC, Colombia, Somalia, Haiti. And in fact, it's really since the end of the 90s that our interventions have expanded to countries of destination of refugees and migrants in Europe, for instance, in Spain, Italy, Belgium, France, Greece, but also more recently in some countries of transits like Morocco, South Africa, Yemen, Malaysia, Thailand, Libya, and Egypt. And today, just to give you a quick snapshot, MSF is actually involved in 30 countries when it comes to refugee crisis around the world. And we basically try to have a very comprehensive package of assistance to these refugees, you know, including shelter, what we call non-food items, water and sanitation, which is very important when you have movements of population, healthcare, including mental health, as you can imagine. You know, when you flee a conflict, when you've been in a conflict of the intensity like Syria, Yemen, South Sudan, I mean, you are dealing with people who are also traumatized. And the focus is very much also on vaccination and nutrition when you have movements of population. And then we try to adapt this package to what people have actually, we try to adapt the package to the needs of the people and what they have actually been confronted to. You know, it's, you have a number of conflicts today where, for instance, you have a very important sexual violence dimension. So that's also something that we try to include in our humanitarian response. To go back to the Syrian crisis, I think, you know, I'd like to maybe focus on two dimensions. One is really what's going on inside Syria, because I think it's very important to remember why people are fleeing, and it's very important to provide a bit of a reality check. And sadly, this reality check is not so pleasant to hear. And just yesterday, our international president, Dr. Liu, was highlighting the very severe impact of the Syrian crisis on civilians. Basically, in this conflict, civilians are really under relentless attack. We are almost 6 years now into this conflict. And yesterday, we actually released some data which are extraordinarily horrific, you know, based on 70 hospitals and clinics that we support in northwestern, western, and central Syria. Basically, what we highlighted is a very grim picture for civilians, and it's not the comprehensive view of the conflicts, obviously. But based on those data, more than 150,000 people were war wounded in Syria. 7,000 were killed last year, and women and children represented 30 to 40% of the victims. So that's just to give you an idea of the cost of this conflict for civilians. The other main constraint we have is that the medical mission is more and more under attack. And we have actually decided to raise the alarm on that front because the kind of series and repeated attacks we've been confronted to in Syria and Yemen must stop. The kind of conduct of hostilities that we are confronted to in Syria and Yemen are simply not acceptable for us, not acceptable for civilians. And we have requested the diplomatic community, the UN system, but also the Security Council for some reassurances. And I think this year we'll have opportunities to really try to ask a number of players and a number of member states to really reassert their commitment on that front. On the European front of the response, I'll be very short. I think very exceptionally, MSF dispatched 3 boats in the Mediterranean Sea. This was very exceptional for us to have to do that. The reason why we did it is because the refugees, most of them from Syria, were not provided safe and legal routes to find a safe haven, and so we had to basically think a bit outside the box and dispatch 3 boats in the sea just to save lives. Obviously, those are just temporary measures to mitigate the kind of risks that people are taking. I mean, I think we will probably discuss that further during the Q&A. But just to really finish, I think to try to be a bit positive and try to also suggest some options. I think one, we need to be able to continue to work in conflicts. If we have so many refugees, it's also because it's getting more and more complicated to work inside conflicts, and it's also more and more complicated for people, for civilians to find a safe haven. So I think we need to restore some basic rules and some basic humanity in conflicts. And as a number of organizations and people said, you know, even war has rules, and I think we need to get back to the basics of international humanitarian law. We need to look very honestly at the response in emergencies and look very honestly at emergency capacities. MSF has been really expressing more and more concerns about the fact that there are less and less doers on the ground, especially in conflicts, especially in refugee crises, especially in medical crises. And I think Ebola was a big wake-up call for WHO, but we are really inviting member states and UNHCR and UNICEF in particular to really look honestly at their emergency capacities. We know they are very much tested, especially UNHCR, but I think it's time to have a honest look at how they perform in emergencies. And then I think we also need, all of us, to change the narrative on refugees and migrants. We are dealing with a very toxic, very xenophobic, very intolerant, very populist narrative in Europe, but also here in the US when it comes to refugees and migrants. And I think we need to rehumanize them. We need to give their names. We need to share their stories. I think that's very important, and we should not accept the kind of climate and the kind of rhetoric that we are dealing with right now. And I think lastly, I want to say that, you know, for Europe, it's extraordinarily important that the European Union, especially the member states, actually more than the European Union, the member states, respect their obligations, and that they really provide safe and legal routes for refugees and migrants to find a safe haven and to find protection and assistance where they need to find that. And I think there's a lot of work to do in terms of improving the living conditions in the reception centers in Europe. I'm not going to lie to you, and I'm finished. We have in front of us a very challenging a very ambitious responsibility of defending the international framework for assistance and protection of refugees. But I really encourage all of you to contribute to that fight and to that enterprise. These are very difficult times, as I said, but I think it's our responsibility, all of us, to really stand up for the values of solidarity, of empathy, of human dignity, and at the end of the day, we are all in the same boat. Thank you.
Kevin?
Thank you. I want to start with a story that happened last week. My colleague is a Syrian medical doctor that works with us, he's based currently in Istanbul, waiting for his case to be processed so that he can come to the United States along with his partner. He called me last week and said that one of his friends from Damascus, who is a pediatric surgeon, contacted him and said that he managed to cross the border illegally to come to Turkey. And I said, well, why did he decide to quit his job as a pediatric surgeon? And he started describing the situation in Damascus, that on average they only have 3 hours of electricity, and as a pediatric surgeon, he's lucky if his salary lasts for a week. So the rest of the month he have to basically borrow money from his parents and sell their stuff in order to pay for the expenses. Imagine, this is the salary of the elite. This is not, but the average people on the street. And he said it became so unbearable that he decided to leave the country. Currently, no country in the Arab region allows them to be relocated to those countries. The only exception is probably Egypt, but Egypt requires a pile of documents to prove that you are financially capable of supporting yourself. Otherwise, they won't issue the visa. Turkey used to be open. They closed the borders a few months ago, and the only way to go there is either to be smuggled to the country, which is what that gentleman did, or to basically apply for a visa and travel by air, which can take months. Long story short, this gentleman managed to get into the Turkey, and despite my attempt in order to dissuade him from being smuggled to Europe, he said, I have made up my mind, I have no choice, no life here, and I just want to try my life anew. He got on a boat, was smuggled to Greece, and 2 days ago I heard from him that now he started his journey all the way down to Germany. I'm telling you this story because this is too often the narrative that I hear from people that I work with. I have another friend that he is a pharmacist, a Syrian pharmacist working in Istanbul. Not being able to find any job, he has to support himself financially by working as a day laborer and moving boxes around. There is a report that was published last year by a group, the Heartland Alliance, which is based in Chicago, that said that half of the Syrian LGBTI refugees who end up in Lebanon end up doing survival sex, not having any other choice to support themselves financially. And that is the picture that you see. Unfortunately, this is true for LGBTI individuals, not only from Syria, but also from Iraq, Iran, and other countries in the region. I have been working with my organization, Outright Action International, for the past 10 years, trying to work with the community, especially in the region where you have the majority of countries very severe penalties for consensual same-sex relations. You have 5 countries, according to the United Nations, that have death penalty for consensual same-sex relations. All of them are located in the Middle East and North Africa: Iran, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Sudan, and Mauritania. The rest of the countries really don't have any better situation. Even in countries like Iraq or Jordan, where you do not have any sodomy laws, you still have a bunch of laws and regulations related to morality and religious laws that allows the government to go after individuals because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. as a result of that, every year hundreds of people decide to choose to leave their country and end up as refugees in neighboring countries, primarily in Turkey, but also in Jordan and in Lebanon. The reality is there is a big difference in terms of the experience of individuals who are LGBTI and the experience of other refugees. If you happen to belong to a religious minority group like the Yazidis or the Christians, or you belong to a political party, you often have the support of your peers, the support of the family. Often the families decide to basically exit together, and they support one another. Whereas for the LGBTI individuals, that's not the case. Often you have cases where the individuals are being disowned by their own family, even being tortured and abused throughout their lives by the family members. And they have no basically recourse. They cannot report the cases to the police because the police would charge them with immorality or violating sodomy laws. So under the circumstances, without any financial support, they end up leaving the country. And once they are in another country like Turkey and Jordan, waiting to be resettled in a safe country through UNHCR, they often have to wait for 2 to 3 years. And while they are waiting, they have no financial support, and also they face a lot of hostility from the local community who are equally homophobic and transphobic. Also, something that observed over the past decade is that the majority of individuals who happen to escape the country of origin are gay men. Very few lesbians or trans individuals even have a chance to escape the country. We did a study in Iraq. It is quite sad. The majority of individuals that managed to obtain a passport and leave the country are gay men who, because of their basically masculinity, they are able to function in the society, find a job, financial independence, and as a result be able to find a way out of the country. If you are a lesbian, chances are that you suffer silently. Either you are subject to domestic violence, forced marriage, marital rape, and in many cases, honor crimes and murder by their own family members. And these are cases that often are not reported. We have been working also on the crimes that have been committed over the past 2.5 years by ISIS. There are, as of now, 39 confirmed cases. And when I mean confirmed, I mean there are cases that ISIS itself documented and reported of individuals, gay men, basically individuals that are accused of being gay and were executed by ISIS. We have no cases of lesbians or trans individuals. And again, the reason being the majority of those individuals are being punished by the society itself without even being able to take their cases to the public or basically being able to escape the environment. So I was given the note that I only have a minute left, I think. There's a whole lot to be said, but I just want to flag something. During the resettlement process, what we often see is that many countries, including the United States, is very reluctant to take individuals that are single individuals, especially men, because they think that they're a higher chance of being terrorists. And this is often the narrative of gay men, the very people who are lucky enough to escape from their own country and find their way in Turkey or in Jordan. And so because they happen to be gay and they happen to be men, they are still being punished by the international community and are not being able to be resettled. So you often see a long waiting period, 2-3 years, and they have to go through various stages of security clearance. And even after that, it's not certain that people are resettled. I have cases that individuals, as they were boarding the plane, they were told that the recipient government changed their mind, or their cases still there are issues with their cases and they had to go back. Imagine after 2 to 3 years escaping your country, walking away from war zone or danger, being able to survive in a hostile environment like Turkey or Jordan, still you don't make it to the sort of safe haven, which is the United States or Canada. I stop here. I'm hoping to continue this conversation throughout the Q&A. Thank you.
Last but not the least, Sana.
Thank you. Can you hear me? That's all. First of all, I would like to thank the UN Association for giving me the chance to speak a little bit about the last 4 years in my life and my family life and every Syrian's life in 8 minutes. So I'll try. Um, in fact, I would start with a very important number for me, which is 959 days. I have not heard or seen or known anything about my dad since 959 days. Nothing. He was kidnapped because it's not detention, it's not legal. He was detained by Assad regime forces in Damascus, Syria on July 2nd, 2013. And ever since, that was the last time we've heard anything about him. We don't know if he's alive. That's how detention works in Syria. And that's why we fled. My family, I have another 2 sisters, and I have my mom. And lucky enough, I was in the US when my dad got detained. Now I say lucky enough. 10 days before his detention, I arrived to the US on a program to come here just for 2 months and go back to Syria. And then after 10 days, he got detained, and that was it. I had to stay here. I had no other option. I could not go back home. And due to his detention, my mom and 2 sisters had to flee. They had no options. You either flee or you get raped. Because what Assad regime does, basically they use women to put pressure on the man to get information. So we had no options. We had to flee. We wanted to stay though, but we had no options. And they fled to Turkey. They smuggled actually to Turkey because they can't go legally also. And they made it to Turkey, my mom and 2 sisters, with nothing. And when I say with nothing, I mean it literally with nothing. Everything was taken back home, and they left with no money, with no one, with just like few documents, and that was it. And the journey started again, because 3 years living in a war zone was not enough. And my journey also started here again. And they have been living now in Turkey, in southern Turkey, for 959 days. And their life is on hold. My life actually is going because I'm here. And obviously I'm here because my life is going in the US gratefully, but their life are not. My sister, who's now 16 years old, has not gone to school in 2 years and a half. And my other sister, who's 25 years old, also, she was detained in 2011. We were detained, and then when we got released, she was not allowed to go back to school because that's how it works in Syria. And then when she also fled, she couldn't continue education because there's no opportunities in Turkey, first and foremost. And secondly, because she was the only person who can provide the family. So she had to work. So you have to work, survive. You have to survive, basically, regardless of all your mental and emotional state. You just have to survive. And the same here. I had to survive regardless of all my feelings. I had no opportunity to really understand what happened. You know, I literally was here also with no money, no one, and nothing, no papers. I knew no one in the US, no one, and I mean it, no one. And how I made it here, it's a long story, it's a long journey. But I was lucky enough to be supported by a lot of amazing, amazing people. And I can't thank them enough, and they know themselves, some of them in the room actually. So, but my family's still there. And what's next? I mean, someone tells me what's next. I visited them gladly after 2 years. I didn't see them ever since my dad got detained. And after 2 years, I was able to see them like just 2 months ago for the first time. And their situation is really, you know, you always imagine it's bad, but then when you see it, it's so different. And I felt so incapable of doing anything. Felt like, what can I do? People ask me, oh, like, can't you bring your family here? well, no, it doesn't work like this. You can't bring anyone here. I can't bring anyone here except my future husband and kids. But I can't bring my family, I can't bring my mom or anyone. And my family has been trying to come here to the US, and they are registered with UNHCR to be resettled to the US. And it's been over a year and a half. And they are, actually, yesterday was their second interview after a year and a half. And they have not started the screening process that takes 18 to 24 months. So we can expect a timeline of 2 years to be resettled here. And that means you just like lost 5 years of your life just waiting. Waiting for what? I mean, we're not talking about numbers, we're talking about my family. You know, we have names. You know, we're one of these 6 million people. Like, my name is Sana. So we have names, we all have names. We have lives, we have dreams. We just need the chances and opportunity to be able to contribute. And I'm here, and we have now around 2,470 Syrian refugees in the US. And you have 1 million in Germany. It's very disappointing. Because I'm very disappointed because I've seen the support here, and I've seen how amazing it is to be here, honestly. I'm interning now with the UN. I mean, that's a wonderful opportunity. Thank you. But I want this opportunity for everyone, for each Syrian. We can't wait. We can't wait. And what you see on the news, it's news for you, right? You turn on TV and it's news. No, it's our lives, actually. It's not news. It's my life. It's every Syrian's life right now. And then I come here and people, start making the comments about us being terrorists. Well, I need to pause, to answer that question. It's just when people actually, genuinely make these comments, and I mean, I understand the fear. Fear is very dangerous. Fearing, and people, this comes from just misinformed people and not educated. And I mean, people don't really go and teach themselves what's happening. Just go look up, go Google, look up and see what's happening. We are fleeing that terror. We are fleeing Assad, first and foremost, terror. And we're fleeing ISIS terror and other extremist group terror. We are the victims. And then we come here and then they say we are terrorists. And honestly, especially the US, people here should not make these comments. If people in Europe make it, I understand because it's easy to get there. And of course, any ISIS member can get on a boat and go to Europe. But to the US, you can't get on a boat and through the Atlantic and come here. I mean, you go through unbelievable screening process to come here. And it takes so long. This needs to change. I mean, now they are talking about even making harder the screening process. That means more time. That means our lives are wasted. We need to take people here in the UN, you guys, everyone here, we need to work on this. We need to take actions. For my life, for every Syrian life, for your life, I think you need to, when you go to bed, I hope you think about what's going on in the world. And so if you want to feel good about yourself, this is the chance for all of us to take actions. And I promise you, let me leave you with this. We will not disappoint you. We're not going to be depending on you. We're not going to spend your tax money. I pay my taxes and I work and I contribute to the community. I contribute to the community as much as I take. And every Syrian will. Just give us that chance.
Wow. Let's collect ourselves, and I'm going to open this up for Q&A, but I feel like...
You need to point to the person, nobody else can...
Okay. Yes. Tell us who you are first.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi. My name is Kayla McLean, and I'm a freshman at Brooklyn College. I'm an out-of-state student from Louisiana. And I just wanted to say that I definitely can relate to what Sana's saying because in November, 14 refugees came to New Orleans, to my city, and after they went through the screening process, which took more than 2 years, and they came malnourished, they didn't have anything, and they lived with the Catholic Charities. But when they went to the hospitals, they were still rejected because they weren't citizens, and it still was like they weren't recognized by the states. And so I was just wondering, because I've done research on this myself through like my studies, because I'm studying international politics, and I'm just wondering, has anyone said anything to Samantha Power about what is going on and that the U.S. can be doing more, because they do have everything that they need. They have the capacity, they have the money, they have everything that they can to make people live here, and it seems like they're not doing anything.
Do you want to take that, Fabian?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that the international community or the Security Council, I mean, are failing. I mean, this is a global failure. I just wouldn't single out the U.S. necessarily, even though they do have a very important responsibility. They're a permanent member of the Security Council. They're primarily in charge of peace and security with this status. This said, I mean, I want to be fair here. I think Ambassador Power, you know, probably a background. I think she has, a very genuine interest in humanitarian issues. I mean, obviously, as you can imagine, MSF, but also other organizations have a very consistent dialogue with the U.S. mission here, but also a number of missions here about the crisis in Syria. And yes, we will continue to push. It's not enough. More have to be done. More have to be done, you know, in Syria to make sure that we can work better. We're not satisfied with our operations in MSF. You know, we're failing. All of us, we are failing in Syria, frankly. We're very frustrated. We should have hundreds of international staff, thousands of international staff deployed in Syria. We just don't, because of ISIS, because of the obstructionism of the government, because of the way the hostilities are conducted. So that's for Syria. And then more has to be done to provide a safe and legal passage to refugees. And that's not working well. I mean, I'm glad you made it to the US, and I really wish you the best here. But you know, if I look at the European Union, it's a bit of a shame, frankly. The kind of narrative that we hear, the kind of failure to just be able to implement some human, you know, a bit of a human asylum policy. You know, I think they're meeting as we speak. And still, you know, the member states are still complaining about the number of people they can receive. So we have to continue to push, all of us.
May I just add something about your question? I think you're absolutely right. It's a collective failure of international community. And Olga, you mentioned something about how the often developing countries in the region are carrying the burden economically, financially, society-wise. And I think this happens to be the case, especially here. With the Syrian crisis, you have over 3 million refugees in Turkey. And then with everything that's happening in Europe, you see that, you know, the Europeans come to Turkey with $3 billion aid package in order to basically tell the Turkish officials, it's your problem, deal with it, basically. We don't want anybody in our country. It's your neighbor. You know how to handle it. And I saw 2 months ago, Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, the head of the main opposition party in Turkey, basically said very frankly that Europeans are giving this $3 billion to Turkey so that Turkey serves as concentration camp for Europe. And this is really what's happening right now. And I think that the international community, including many countries in the region, don't want to live up to their responsibilities. And just give you an example, many people say, well, you know, those Syrians who cross the sea and try to go to Europe, they can stay in Turkey, which is true. But that's not the whole picture. If you happen to be in Turkey, they give you what they call kimlik, which basically is an ID card. With that ID card, you cannot find a job. In very exceptional cases, you can use medical benefits, but often you can't. There is systematic discrimination and a lot of xenophobia in the society that they do not want to deal with you. So you end up being in a society without any job, without any economic opportunity. As you mentioned, even going to school remains to be a pipe dream for many people. So under the circumstances, the only way you can possibly think, you know, you have a future is just try, you know, your best. If you have money, you pay somebody across the ocean or the sea. If you survive, then hopefully you can find your way to Germany. Otherwise, you can stay there for years and years without any resolution.
I just want to also say that Samantha Power might be sympathetic to humanitarian affairs, right? But there is checks and balances in the United States. And this is why we're thinking about the executive branch might want to do things, but they need the money to do things, right? So this is why we're going to do what we're going to do in about 10 minutes to try to get our Congress members to mobilize. And I know there are a lot of people from around the country here, not just New York. So we have to really think about our role around the country, connecting with our Congress members in our advocacy roles as UNA members to get them to take action on this issue. So I'll go to the next question. Way in the back. Yes. Yes, you.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. I'm from Queens, a student of State University of New York. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. This is my third conference in this month, February. This is my second home United Nations. So good morning all. I will be late, I was class. So my question is refugee crisis. We're trying to figure out this in the youth. Yesterday and other 17 we do in Youth Assembly United Nations headquarters. We ever talk about the refugee crisis and some other international community or youth who how can we can do solve this problem, how can we can help them, and even we can fundraising for them. It's not possible to go there. They are our family, and I think everybody should like think it that they are part of our family. We don't want to kill any other human being. We save all human beings. This is for, I don't think so this is religious crisis, this is political crisis. If political leader won, there will be peace. They should sit down together and they should talk about these things. They should solve this problem.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, question is, sorry. Question is, can you tell me what's going on there and how can we clarify this and specify this? How can we help this refugee crisis? And still, after they get out from the Syria, going to Europe or America, and I saw in the news and Facebook, there are a lot of people there sexual harassment, and keep going on. Still not they are safe in there outside the Syria. Thank you so much.
Sana, do you want to take this? How can people help the refugees after they come to the United States?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, we can help on many levels as an individual or organizations, but I think the hardest part is integration when you come here, and the mental state that people come with is just so hard. You know, to come to a new country and then you already have your mental issues. So I think the mental support is very, very important. And it's kind of a little bit hard to be able to find it. I've been looking myself. If someone gives me resources, that would be great. I'm gonna echo this. But no, seriously, it's really hard to find counseling services for refugees. And then the other thing would be, you know, provide your friendship, your smile, your just, you know, your manners. You know, I think it really makes my day every day when I see, like, when I have coffee with a friend. You know, I'm just like, we chit chat, we you know, talk about life, and sometimes they ask me, like, genuinely, how are you? And I don't say just okay. I might go on, and they listen. So I think the individual support is very important. Besides, you know, then like help them, you know, navigating their ways, their way in the country. You know, like when I came here, I did not know how credit card works. You know, that's simple. We don't know this stuff, so you can help in many ways.
Hello. Assalamu alaikum. Sana, you asserted that you believe that whenever the Syrians will come here, that giving them the opportunity will not disappoint us. But in all honesty, I feel that I hope we don't disappoint you, the Syrians, the women, the children, the LGBT community. So my question is regarding the refugee youth have been on the move for years, starting in 2014, and they've been on the move for months and now years. How do you ensure, and they're moving to developing countries such as Pakistan and Lebanon, how do you ensure education for these youth who have possibly been not in school for months and years, especially moving to nations where literacy rate is already very low and limited?
This is a really important question, and one that we will be discussing at UNA for sure, that we care about. But can I ask Fabienne about this? Do you know anything?
I think it's difficult for me to answer you in very practical terms, because MSF is not really involved in education. But you know, I do recognize that this is a very big issue, because you know, if you look at the figures, half of the refugees are 18 or under 18. The amount of time that refugees and IDPs spend displaced is, I think, around 17 years. So that's a very important question. I think it's more a question for UNICEF, frankly, because they're traditionally more involved in education. We're not. We're absolutely not. So I'm sorry, I can't provide you a very concrete answer.
Well, I can say one thing is that it's not a consistent response. So depending on where the refugees are and what kind of services there can be, it is varied from country to country. And, you know, there are some places that UNHCR is trying to keep people alive just by, you know, giving them food, and they're cutting back on food rations because the money is not out there. And so when that's the case, then you don't have education. Education is the last priority, right? At that moment. But there are other places where there is actually education facilities, because the host country has the capacity to be able to respond. Early on in Turkey, some of the camps had really good schools, but then those kind of, I mean, after 4 or 5 years, those tend to start to dwindle. The resources go down. Some continue, others don't. So it depends on the refugee, where they are. So this should be a priority for all, right? When you have your life on hold for 5 years and you have a refugee child who is at the formidable age of learning how to read and write, if they lose those 5 years, that you have lost a whole generation of people. So it should be a priority for all of us. So we are actually at time right now, so I'm going to cut us off, and I'm going to invite on that Micah and Monica to the lectern to call us to action. And thank you so much for listening to us.